Games in this podcast range from E to M.
Oh, didn't see you there. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the official Xbox podcast. It's the only podcast coming to you from inside Xbox. And as you can see, once again, I'm back at Obsidian Entertainment because they're about to ship The Outer Worlds 2, which launches October 29th on consoles, PC, and of course, day one with Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. Obsidian is known for many things, but one of those things is building great RPGs. And part of building a great RPG is building one that's immersive, building one that the player feels like they're a part of. And one of the ways Obsidian is doing that is by building in a radio. Sounds weird, right? But yes, they're building in a radio into the game, and not just any radio, one that actually reacts to you, the player, and your actions. So I want to learn more about it. So that's what I'm going to do because I'm here, so might as well, right? So we're going to go find somebody to talk about it, and I'm going to take this Moonman head home because, it's pretty sick, isn't it? So let's go to Obsidian. All right, so I was walking the halls, making myself feel at home. I got myself a cold brew. They have it on tap here, by the way. And then I ran into Brandon Adler, who you should recognize from a podcast we did before. And just to get prepared for this before the camera started rolling, I was like, Brandon, what's your title? And Brandon said Emperor. What does that mean?
First, I don't remember saying that at all. I think you may have interpreted that. I'm pretty sure I said game director.
Here we go. The gaslighting is on something else today. But I watched back a lot of my interviews and I realized that I asked the same question over and over again.
Okay.
But it's because I genuinely want to know, like you're about to ship a game, the third game that Obsidian has shipped this year, The Outer Worlds 2.
Right.
How's the team feeling? How are you feeling?
Personally, real anxious.
Yeah.
I always get really anxious before we put a game out. A little bit nervous, but I'm really excited for players to get their hand on the game.
Well, as someone who gets anxious, people always tell me like it shows that you care, and it's very clear that Obsidian cares about The Outer Worlds 2, and it cares about their audience, cares about making great games, and we've seen that over and over again. As we stop perfectly in time to reference this wall. Did we plan that? You'll never know. You'll never know.
We had it built in the middle of this interview right there.
Exactly. So Brandon, I want to ask you, like as a game maker, right? There's so many little things that you add to a game, right? That while you're making it, you're like, I love this. I want to add it to the game, or I can't wait for players to experience this. I want to know from you, what are you most excited about for players to experience when they jump in?
Yeah, well, I feel like The Outer Worlds 2 is kind of like harkening back a bit to how we used to do RPGs. And so one of the things I'm really excited to see when we actually give this to the players is what kind of character builds they come up with, because there's so many different options. And then the players always come up with some stuff that I had no idea. And I'm like, wow, that's just ingenious and fun. And so I'm really excited to see that.
Yeah, and I actually want to take it a step back because this is the sequel. So I'm imagining there's a lot of different considerations when you're making a sequel.
Sure.
But there are also probably a lot of players who are going to be playing The Outer Worlds 2 and haven't played Outer Worlds 1. What can they expect? Tell us a little bit about what the game is.
Yeah, sure. So The Outer Worlds 2 is a big open world CRPG. It's in the vein of something like a Fallout or Skyrim, if people are familiar with that. You can do dang near anything. If you want to go guns blazing into stuff, we have options for that. You can talk your way through most things. You can stealth and sneak through a bunch of different things. Lots of choice and lots of reactivity and lots of consequences for those choices.
Yeah, I feel like it's the hallmark of an Obsidian game, right? Everything that you're doing. And like the combat's improved. I was watching the previews and I got to play it myself, and it is everything that I think an Obsidian game should be, but like it's clear that you all are taking it to the next level. So I'm excited to play it when it comes out. But we've talked on the podcast previously about factions, and as a part of that, we're going to talk today about the radio. And I hear there's a man named Leonard around here.
Yeah,
Is that accurate?
I think we've hired somebody named Leonard.
Okay, well, we're going to find out if that's true, and if it is Leonard, and if they happen to know about the radio, we're going to talk to them. Let's go find out.
All right, let's go do it.
Let's do it. All right, Brandon and I are properly sat in our seat, doing that fake little walking.
It was not fake. We actually walked.
That's true. We did it, but I feel
like sitting here waiting for you guys. You guys took forever.
Leonard was just here. Well, you see a lot on the news, like when they're just doing these walking interviews, and you're just like, why aren't you just sitting doing? Like, why do you need to make this overly complicated? But we did it. We did that as a kid.
Now we're simplifying.
We're simplifying.
Right.
And we're simplifying with a new friend here. We got Leonard Boyarsky, who is creative director of The Outer Worlds 2. Leonard, How are you?
Doing good. How are you doing?
I've been better, but I've been worse as well. But no, excited to have you. Very exciting time. Obviously, you're about to ship the Outer Worlds 2, which is coming up so soon. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the game. But before we do that,
Sure.
You are the creative director, which, by the way, at different studios means different things. So what does it mean to be the creative director of the Outer Worlds 2?
So the creative director, especially, my part in this at Obsidian is really kind of helping to define what the tone and feel of the game is going to be from a narrative standpoint. I work very closely with Daniel Alpert, our art director, in terms of what we want to do visually. I worked very close with him. We worked closely together on the first game, which is where we really, started from scratch and stood up this IP with no previous knowledge of what it was going to be, just coming up with the early ideas, how we're going to fit it all together, what it's going to look like visually, how that's going to represent our robber barons in space aesthetic. We had this whole turn of the century from the 19th to 20th century. What's the retro future is with that as a touchstone? How are the factions going to be represented? All that stuff is kind of tied up in how the writing is going to go and how we're going to represent the different characters and factions in the game. So really just you could boil it all down to what's the tone of the game? What's the humor going to be like? How are people going to feel when they're playing this game from a story and art and just vibe perspective?
He's also the gatekeeper for what the IP is, right?
And the dream killer for people.
Well, but there's a lot, it's a difficult IP for some people to pick up. So we can go to Leonard and be like, hey, how does this work in the Outer Worlds? And he can be like, no, not quite, but this would if you did something like this. So he does a great job with that too. Trying
to write for a game like this is difficult enough, and then I'm like, hey, let's make it even more difficult. Let's get this really dry humor in there, and they're going to talk like turn of the century, early 20th century characters too. So
a lot of different pieces, a lot to put together, and so basically you're directing the creative.
Hey, we should call me that. That should be my title.
I figured it out. I didn't even have to ask that question at the time. I'm just kidding. But today we're going to be talking about the radio. We're really excited because there's a lot of different ways that's going to kind of influence the player. The player is going to experience it in a few different ways. And so we're excited to dive in. My moon man back here, my buddy back here, excited to dive in. Yes?
Nice.
Just sitting creepily. Let's talk about it. Let's go into the radio.
That's the moon man's thing, by the way, sitting creepily.
Just chilling, right?
He's really good at that.
All right, so we're here to talk about the radio and some of the interactivity and all that kind of stuff. What was it about that concept that made it like, whatever we're going to put in the game, this definitely needs to be in it because it's so important to the game?
Yeah, it was one of those things very early on, just talking with Leonard and Matt Singh. We were like, all right, we definitely want to have a radio. How do we want this thing to work? How do we want to piece this thing together? And kind of what's important to those things. Obviously, it's a good vector for reactivity. And so we use that a good amount in there where the things that you're doing in the world get commented on by all of the DJs in the different radio stations. It's also a really good way to get like a little preview of the life of the people in that faction. You don't always get that when you're interacting with the content itself, at least at that deep level sometimes. And so having the radio, it just lets you, what kind of stuff do they listen to in terms of the music itself? But like what type of ads are they having? What kind of PSAs are you hearing? And that really kind of just sets the tone. It's interesting. Like I almost view the radio stations, we got 3 of them, and they're really fully featured. I almost view them almost like companions in some ways. They just are really fully featured in there. And again, they give a really good insight into the world itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the best worlds that have been built in gaming have had these moments where it was very clear that the devs went in and implemented places where, not through necessarily player actions, but just how they built the world, whether it's like art assets in the world or it's stuff like the radio. Like some of the best games have had those elements. So it's really cool to see that you all are building that into the game. Just as a baseline for folks who are jumping into Outer Worlds 2 for the first time, actually, can you walk us through what those radio stations are and basically the factions that they represent?
Yeah, we can get deeper into that, but to me, the most important part of the radio, it's kind of like what Brandon was saying, is it's just another way for us to kind of like immerse the player in it. So you have the view of people in the world. They're the ones who are trying to kind of like follow what they're supposed to be doing. But you also have the radio, which is kind of like the state sponsored, like, here's what you should think as a subject. So like the great thing we were able to do with that for each of the factions is really kind of like show their idealized version of what they thought of themselves as and what they wanted other people to think of themselves as. So for the Protectorate, the challenge for us there is they're an authoritarian dictatorship. What's their humor? How do we keep them from just being like dry and too on the nose? So we kind of like went with a more, everybody's neighbor Prudence is the DJ there. It's this kind of like overly sweet, subtly threatening,
maternal kind of thing.
Yeah. If you're going to be a good subject of the Protectorate, you have to be like this, turn in your neighbors if they're doing anything wrong. You of course like are going to only think pure thoughts. The Order of the Ascendant is all about like science as a religion. So they're this weird mix of science lectures with stuff that sounds very religious oriented. Their DJ is, we likened him to an NPR kind of like host.
Love that.
And then for Auntie's Choice, it was, the bombastic salesman always like selling you on stuff. So it was a really interesting way of kind of immersing players in that kind of feel of the world. I really love that kind of thing where it's like you have your propaganda posters. We did a lot of that in the base game, but the radio is just a whole other dimension of that, where it kind of like just really permeates everything.
Yeah. And I imagine you want players to kind of, I don't know if connect themselves to one faction is the best way to put it, but like I'm sure when players are playing the game, they may end up siding with a faction over another one. As you all were playing internally, what was it like seeing other folks play the game and kind of interpreting the propaganda of each station?
Yeah, I mean, early on, we had talked about making sure that every single faction had actually even good elements to it.
Yes,
as a player, right? Like you could look at that and you could start talking to them. You're like, yeah, I can see where your philosophy is and why it's important. You may not agree with it, but you can kind of see that. And that's for all three of the major factions, right? And so I think that's a big important element in kind of drawing people in, is making sure that they're also somewhat appealing. They can't just be this, oh my gosh, Auntie's Choice is grinding its people down into nothing, all in the sake of profit or something, because that's just not appealing.
Right.
But if you see that like they actually truly do think that they are spreading freedom and choice to people that don't have it, and they're confused why they don't want it in some cases. They're like, you can do whatever you want. Like, yeah, you have to work hard, you have to maybe, cut some throats and step over some people to get what you really need, but you can go do that. You have the freedom to go do that. When you're a Protectorate subject, you didn't have the ability to do that. And so, I think it's really interesting that we kind of leaned really hard on that and really kind of showed the cool stuff about them as well.
Yeah, I mean, in movies, TV, games, no bad guy ever thinks they're bad, right?
Right.
And so some of the best characters have that nuance. They have that depth where they believe that they're doing the right thing. And like those are the best bad guys, so to speak. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more into the DJs, and obviously they're anything but neutral, right? Like, so can you tell me a little bit about what the writing process was like for that and the casting process?
The Antes was probably the easiest for us to kind of like wrap our heads around, because that was pretty much a continuation of the kind of like the aesthetic and the vibe we set up in the first game, and the type of humor. We did add, the whole self-betterment, self-determination thing, individuality, which wasn't a big part of it in the first game. So we kind of added that element to it where they're kind of using that as their sales slogans. But from there, it was really kind of tough to figure out like, how do we write for the Protectorate radio? Like what's funny about them? What's going to be engaging about them? The same thing with the Order. How do we make them not dry? How do we make them, their kind of like dryness actually humorous? So it was a lot of iteration. It was a lot of experimentation. It was a lot of going back and forth till we kind of found the right tone. And then when we went and cast, we had a very specific idea for just how we wanted each one to sound. I feel like, Antes was kind of like obvious, and the Protectorate, once we kind of came up with this Prudence idea, that seemed kind of like an obvious thing. But the Order one was, we kind of had the idea of the NPR announcer, but we weren't quite sure, how that was going to play. So that was really an interesting one where we kind of went through, we had a couple different really good candidates or people auditioning for it, till we found somebody who could just really nail it, which is ironic because he was one of the main characters in the first game.
I love that, the idea of kind of building something that's your own, right? Like these are not only obviously the stations and the factions are part of this world, but the player will experience songs that you all created, and it's really just building out this faction. And it must be so cool to just kind of see how players are going to like react to it, which is going to be cool. So I actually want to talk about reactivity, because that is a big piece of this.
Yeah.
It's not just about having static radio stations, but as I understand, the radio stations will react to how players kind of tackle quests. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Even very, very early on. So there's kind of two major things that we do for content itself, which is we have call to actions, where a lot of times we'll point out an area that you're currently in. You're like, hey, the Arbiter training facility. And then we actually kind of scare players a little bit of like, it's pretty, who knows what's going on over there, but there's a lot of auto mechanicals that are still running. It's a really scary place, but there's probably some really cool stuff in there. So like players are like, oh, I want to go over there and deal with that. And then you have the other aspect, which is, some of our areas have like these larger quests and like larger implications for what happens. And so you go in there, you solve a quest in a very specific way, and you have multiple radio stations which are commenting on it, right? Like very early on, there's an auto mechanical repair facility that you're going into, and they have a big problem, which is they're leaking uranium gas, which is a highly toxic gas, and they're like, hey, we're having lots of problems. And so you can go in there and they want you to help fix this, and like a good Obsidian RPG, you can help fix that especially if you have the skills and whatever, or you can even make it worse and make it so they can never fix it by completely sabotaging it. And depending on what you do, both the Auntie's Choice and Protectorate radio stations have something to say about that, right? If you help them out, the Protectorate hails what a great job it was for them to hire this contractor that came in and helped fix this thing. And, and then if you fix that thing, the Auntie's Choice talks about you as, this horrible presence that is helping out the Protectorate and, not helping them. And so we do that in a lot of different places, and it really kind of makes the world feel alive. Like, again, it's just reacting to all of the things that you're kind of doing there. And yeah, I hope that it really comes across to the players as a cool reactive moment for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what players are going to really love. It's not just that the stations are reactive to what they do, but I think it's the differing perspectives of what they do and how that comes through in the radio station. Like, I think that's such a dynamic experience.
You also get the big story moments as well,
yeah.
Right? So like there's big story moments that happen, and it's really cool to see each faction and their radio station and their take on what just happened in front of them.
Yeah.
And in some cases, they're like, what a gigantic blunder that was. And then that gets spun on the other side of like, what a great victory for us in this way. And then I always found that to be very interesting and really funny to hear all of the different sides of all of these things. There's also, we can't talk about some of this reactivity, but there's some really amazing moments in the second half of the game, especially on the Protectorate radio stuff. So I'll let players kind of...
Okay.
There was also some really good foreshadowing, which I won't talk about, that because I'd been present for a lot of the recording, and obviously I was very heavily involved in all the writing, or working with the writers on it, and so I knew all of it. We kind of had all these plans in place, when we went in to record the stuff. But I was running around one of our planets, and I heard somebody, on the radio say something, and I'm like. It was funny because as a player, I heard it. I'm like, oh, I totally want to do that. And as, a developer, I'm like, oh, that totally worked. The idea that we had when we first designed this, like totally landed in my player brain when I was playing. What's really interesting though about all that reactivity is we kind of had a rudimentary version of that or not rudimentary, but it was like a visual version of it in the first game where the loading screens reacted. And we kind of continued that here. In the first game, it was all from the perspective of the board, which was the antagonist of the game. In this one, each faction has different loading screens, just like they have the different radio stations. And the more interesting part from a writing standpoint is when, you have a faction like the Protectorate who's like, everything is, we know everything, and everything is going according to, our plan because we're perfect and everybody else is kind of, second rate. So they always have to spin it like they knew that it was going to happen. It's part of their, it didn't take them by surprise.
Even the bad things were a test of some sort.
Exactly.
And that's the test.
Of course.
So that's some really, really good humorous moments there, but it can be very difficult to try to figure out, okay, how are we spinning this in a way that's funny, very obvious to the player that that's what they're doing, but in the world it doesn't sound like that's what they're doing. So it becomes very meta very, very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that's propaganda 101, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what happens, it just matter how you, analyze it.
And now Leonard can go write propaganda for various governments.
Yeah, there you go.
That's my life.
That's his ultimate goal.
Yeah.
There you go. Next role. But no, that's great to hear. And I just kind of want to talk a little bit about something I know players will also enjoy, which is something that I sometimes struggle with video games is like, all right, you play a game, you're done with your session, and then you have to come back the next day and pick up where you left off.
Right.
And oftentimes that means, wait, what was I doing? I have a lot going on in life, I can't remember. But you all have worked in a very specific solution to that. Brandon, tell us about it.
All right, so towards the end of production, I don't know, it was probably the last few months of production, I just had like this weird idea. I was like, what if like you could have a conversation on the loading screen, like with somebody, maybe like the Moon Man or whatever, and you could maybe ask him questions and he can answer some stuff for you, and you could have some cool, fun reactivity. So I sent something over to Leonard and I was like, hey, Leonard, is this a crazy idea or will this work? And he was like, well, I don't know. There's a lot of problems we're going to have to work through, but I think it could probably work. And like, then we talked to Tim. We're like, hey, Tim, what do you think of this? And Tim was like, yeah, it's a cool idea. We should try to do something like this. So I worked with Leonard and Tim and a few other people, and we came up with the conversational main menu. So it is a conversation that you're having with the Moon Man. Even the very first time you start up the game, he talks to you and addresses you, and it's really funny, and he's also extremely sarcastic, and he's also a little bit salty about Auntie's choice and what happened to him, and so that kind of comes through as well. But the really cool elements are he reacts and talks to you every time you kind of load in a new game or when you start up the game again. It takes a look at your save, and it will just talk to you about things that you've done. It'll talk to you about how you've built out your character, maybe items you found. Sometimes it'll even point you in a direction if you haven't found something. It's like, oh yeah, like why don't you try looking over here, you know, in his funny way. And you know, it took a while for it to really kind of come together because we had to get all of the writing and all of the reactivity, but it's a blast. And every time you go through, and it even talks about things that you've done in the game or the next thing you're going to be doing at times. So to your point, it kind of reminds you like, hey, you're on this part of the path, and here's kind of the next thing you're going to be doing, but again, in a very kind of like fun, funny, conversational way with the Moon Man himself.
Which I love. You know, Brandon, you mentioned how, you know, you and Leonard kind of were discussing whether it's possible, just from a cool idea standpoint. But I mean, to your point, it ended up blossoming into something that I think will help a lot of players with busy lives and just wanting to, and also delighting them. I think that's such a cool thing. Like every time you start up the game, you can expect, you know, the progress that you made since the last time you played to be, you know, I guess referenced back to you. And I think that's such a cool thing to see. All right, so we've talked a lot about what players will experience when they turn on the radio in the Outer Worlds 2, but as I do in many of my interviews, I'm going to ask you to pick your favorite child. So is there, from both of you, a favorite ad, PSA, or song in the game that you want to call out? Without spoilers, obviously.
For me, my favorite ad, and only because I just laughed so hard the first time I heard it, which again, I had read this copy before it was ever recorded, but it like took me by surprise when I heard it, and I just laughed out loud. And it was something that Tim actually wrote for us, which was an ad for the Fab, which was perfection in sandwich form, I think is the actual line. It's an order product, and you know, everything is science with them, and so they've like, you know, did all the math to make a perfect sandwich, and then they sell it to you, which just made me, you know, bust up.
I kind of want one.
Yeah.
I was going to say,
how could you not want a Fabwich?
Anyone who knows me knows I hate sandwiches. And the reason, it's like anytime we have like a team meeting and it's like, oh, we're ordering sandwiches, what would you like? I'm like, nothing.
Now
I would
you
like
say the Fabwich.
Exactly.
Yeah. But the reason for that is because like, two reasons. One, you could just make a sandwich at home. So I feel like you can make anything at home, but a sandwich is just such a home thing. But the second thing is like the ratio of meat to cheese to bread has to be right. Otherwise it throws off
the order would have no problem with satisfying you.
I'm right there with you on that one. I love that. Brandon, what about you?
Well, I kind of got two things. So the first, my favorite song is called The Undiscovered Axiom. It's just like legitimately a beautiful song that the Order sings. It has like almost like Gregorian chant kind of style and flair to it, which is pretty cool. And so that one actually, whenever that's on, I'm just like, yeah, okay, cool. My song popped up and I'm having a good time. The other thing is, it's actually a PSA, kind of, from Auntie herself. So when you're listening to the Auntie radio, she has this thing where she breaks in, and it's kind of her airing of grievances. And she talks about a bunch of employees, and she's like, hey, you know, John Smith, remember that time that you were talking about, you know, how I underperformed on this thing? He's like, well, now you're going to be underperforming by picking up garbage on like, and so she just kind of goes through this whole list of people that she's demoting, and I think it's actually called like the demotion list or something like that. And so she goes through the whole thing, and it is really funny. Every time I bust out laughing.
No, that sounds hilarious. I cannot, but I'm excited again. Like we're focusing on the radio because, again, it's going to be such an integral part of like what the players experience as they're playing through the game and how much it makes them feel, a part of the world. So that's going to be so cool. I want to wrap this up by asking you all what you're most excited to see. Like, Brandon, we talked at the top of this podcast about how you all are feeling. You're about to ship this game, the third game in the year, which is insane. But you're shipping The Outer Worlds 2 and it stands on its own. So what are you most excited for players to experience when they jump in?
Just the increased reactivity. I mean, this is something, one of our main goals is always, as far as the RPGs we make, is the reactivity. And the first game, we had some really good reactivity, but it was a shorter development time, it was much smaller team. I mean, much smaller amount of time and resources. So we kind of had to, pick and choose. Mm-hmm. And this one, we kind of went old school where we're just like as much as possible, we want the player to be able to make their own choices, have the game react accordingly. And that takes like us going through and playing the game and having people going like, hey, why can't I use my perk here? Why can't I do this thing? And that's like so much of our grid ideas came from people like playing the game on the team and being like, why can't I do this? Yeah. Well, of course you can. It's funny, like Brandon, when he pitched the radio stuff, it's just like, is this too crazy? It's like, well, if it's crazy, we should do it. And that's kind of how we approach this stuff. It's like the more unexpected and the more players being able to do whatever they want, the better. And I think we've really kind of like delivered on that. So I'm really excited to not only hear players' experience of the game, but to hear their experience of like hearing their friends' experiences and comparing those two things and how, how much fun each one had, and hopefully getting people to jump back in to try different builds and different play styles.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best part of any RPG is like, oh, did you experience this? No, I didn't see that. Where'd you? Yeah. Best part of RPG. What about you, Brandon?
Yeah, kind of piggybacking on what Leonard had said, I hope that, and I'm excited for players to see like kind of a return to form of like some of the older stuff. Like a lot of what we did is take inspiration from not only Obsidian's older games, things like New Vegas or whatever, but older games that we loved in the industry in terms of the type of RPG and bringing that RPG through, build, all the build reactivity that we do, all the reactivity in terms of how everything can play out in the world. Like these are all things that, over time have kind of been streamlined out of RPGs in a lot of ways. Yeah. But we love that stuff. And, Leonard was seminal in making some of that stuff. And so it was easy to talk to him about this and go like, how can we bring this stuff forward? Like, what are the types of things that we need to be doing to really kind of bring this stuff back? And I think we did a really great job, and I think players are going to love that.
Yeah, I mean, building off of the history of Obsidian, and then also building on, as you mentioned, Leonard, some of the things that, the team was like, why can't I do this? I would love if I were able to do this in a game. I feel like those are the ingredients for a fantastic game. October 29th, The Outer Worlds 2 is out, but yes, you can play early October 24th. And of course, it's going to be day one in Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. Leonard, Brandon, thank you all so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Lee.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And thank you, Moonman, for joining me as well. You've been such a good little couch member. Good couch companion.
There you go.
Thank you. And for all of you, thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next official Xbox podcast.